Hey everybody, my next guest is the founder of BRAVEMAKER, a nonprofit film arts organization that mentors and supports and elevates brave voices through film, and it creates space for transforming community conversations. Please welcome Tony Gapastione.
Ciao, hey, how you doing over there?
That's a very New York name. Gapastione or
Gapastione. Yeah, my grandparents came over, great grandparents came over from Napoli sometime in the early 1900s and settled in Chicago. So I'm actually from Chicago, which is like, the lesser New York,
Yeah, a lot of Italian heritage comes out of there. We got Al Capone's was a Chicago.
Yeah, we don't talk about him. Dark side of the family. Just kidding. I don't know.
No, yeah, there's definitely a rich Italian culture in Chicago. I knew a hockey guy. He's on the Carolina Hurricanes named Bates Battaglia, and his whole family's rich Italian from Chicago area and all that kind of stuff.
Battaglia, yeah, that's a great one. I love Italian culture, food, people. Don't love all the weight that you put on when you enjoy it, but I do love it.
That's what's tough, man. Like growing up in New York and on Long Island in an Italian neighborhood, I'm like an honorary Italian. I for years thought I was Italian until Ancestry.com told me I wasn't.
You're like 0%? What happened?
Yeah, I'm like, what? But it is hard that the best parts of the Italian food, if you're on a diet, no pasta, no bread, all that kind of stuff. It's
like, what are you eating? You're eating olives if you're
yeah, like the antipasto, yeah, something like that. Yeah.
You have to understand something about the way I grew up. I grew up in a house that was food everywhere. Every 2 feet, you just bumped in.
But no, that's so now, yeah, you're kind of in California. You're in the Bay Area, like San Francisco.
I live in San Francisco Bay Area. It's called Redwood City is where I live. We're like 30 minutes south of San Francisco.
Yeah. And how is it in California these days? Because, you see stuff, images on the news. You never know what's real.
It's all real.
Yeah.
Believe it all.
Yeah.
California, it's almost like a country sometimes. It's so big and there's so many different pockets of it. So I live, in the Bay, which, people assume a lot of things about San Francisco, but there's a lot of gnarly things happening. I just do video work with BRAVEMAKER, and this is kind of dark, but I did a PSA about all the anti-hate toward the Asian community that was happening in San Francisco. Wow. And you kind of like can go, that's unbelievable. San Francisco is so inclusive and liberal, but hate is everywhere. So I think California, we have our issues, of course. People think we're going to fall off into the ocean. Who knows? But there's always something going on. I think the planet and its impact in weather is definitely showing here. Where when I moved here 25 years ago, it was like climate was perfect, and now we're having cold spells and flash floods, and it's getting crazily hot. And I moved in an area where nobody had air conditioning. It was like if you were air conditioned home, you were like a millionaire. Now
right.
It's like you can't survive in the summers without the air. So it's just a weird time.
If you are shaded in the deep blue or green, you can expect your winter precipitation to range wildly. It's a hallmark of California's climate to do this. A lot of it has to do with our latitude. We're kind of right on the southern edge of the storm track, and sometimes we can get huge winters because of that. And if the storm track just shifts a little north, we can get nothing. That's what happened last winter. We were breaking records in July for being way warmer than we should have been and much drier.
I still love California. I still believe, being on the coast as you are, there's a lot of amazing culture happening in New York and in California. And it's still a good hotbed, even though it might be a hot mess, a hotbed of creativity. That's why I love being here.
And that's what's great about San Francisco, because especially with the arts, if the history of the arts, like the music scene, what Haight-Ashbury Street and all that kind of stuff, and that whole era, all these great bands, it was like the place to be. And then the comedy scene too. I'm a big comedy guy. Comedy scene was thriving out of San Francisco, like in the 50s and 60s, and that's where a lot of cutting edge, just where comedy changed, really,
cool.
with like
Yeah.
Mort Saul and Lenny Bruce and all those guys were coming up through that scene, and yeah, just it's good to have a place like a San Francisco that you could, as an artist especially, you could feel free to express yourself. You know,
I like the culture here a lot. I like the people. The Bay Area is, it's 6 hours drive from LA, 45 minutes on a plane. We think we're close enough to get that special magic, Los Angeles dust, but we're not. It's a small pool, if you will, so you kind of be a somewhat medium-ish big fish in a small pool, which feels great. I'm somehow able to survive doing creativity, film production, and that kind of thing. But I have hopes that we'll become in the Bay Area a more desirable location to do film and TV. That's kind of why I started BRAVEMAKER, is to establish more of that here in the Bay.
Yeah, you would think that people would be kind of driven to go over there. I mean, like I've never been to San Francisco. It's on my bucket list. It's a place I've always wanted to go, especially because, like I said, I want to see some of these comedy clubs that legendary, that are still standing. But also I think the views and just everything you have there is beautiful. Like, in some of the other movies and the images you see, it's just like, wow, man, this city looks amazing.
Iconic. Yeah.
Yeah, very iconic and pleasing to the eye, kind of like New York, where I think there's a lot for filmmakers that would want you to have that kind of backdrop of San Francisco.
Yeah, and all the films that were filmed here, The Rock and Mrs. Doubtfire. I mean, every time I drive over the Golden Gate Bridge, which I do on a weekly basis, I feel like I need to pinch myself. I still the inclination is to take a photo every time I go over the Golden Gate Bridge. In fact, I started doing it so much I created my own little hashtag, like hashtag Golden Gate Tony, because every time I'd go over it, it would feel that new kind of like excitement, that rush, and it doesn't get old. At least it hasn't yet for me, and I've been in the Bay for 25 years.
Yeah, no, that's great, because there are some things that just should never get old, and to feel that kind of feeling of awe when you go over like a bridge like that, or for me, even when I go into Manhattan, I feel like Long Island is similar to San Fran that way, maybe, where you talk about LA and it's 3 hours. For me, I'm about an hour and a half outside of Manhattan. And when I go to Manhattan, it's still that magic of, when you start going over the bridges and you start getting closer, and the traffic and the smell of the homeless. No, I'm just kidding. But no, but when you get in, when you get into the city, it's a beautiful, magical experience where you talk about like pinching yourself and you want to take pictures, and it's never gets old. And I grew up here and still never gets old.
Cool.
When I go.
It's a great feeling to have.
New York, New York, it's a wonderful town.
Also was looking at your bio, and it said that you were a pastor as well.
Yeah.
So tell me about that, and how'd you get into becoming a pastor, and what's that like, and what kind of messages are you preaching?
Yeah. I am still kind of baffled with my life and how it works out. I'm this pastor, this ordained, minister who, I do preach Sundays in a church building, a building with a cross on it. And I do weddings and funerals, as well as I'm a filmmaker and actor. It's just really weird, but it just happens to be my life. So I grew up in Chicago, like I said, quasi-Catholic is what I would say. I didn't go every Sunday.
Right.
I was a bad Italian Catholic. But I was very much into the smells and the bells when I could, like the Easters and the Christmas midnight masses. Yeah. Every Catholic kid, wants to stay up late on Christmas Eve just for the thrill of staying up late and going to midnight mass. I never felt a sense of judgment or condemnation, and thankfully I did emerge unscathed and untouched by priests. I'll say that.
There you go.
Which I know many people did it, and they need to be judged for that. Those people who have taken that that cruelty, and I would say it's just wrong. It's sinful. It's evil. What has happened under the auspices of a spiritual community, like, that's just so wrong. So it's just weird to kind of just like divide and separate the fact that I did have good experiences. And I'd say more good experiences just came from the sense of awe that I had being in those spaces. I really felt like the, the stained glass, windows, the music, the big, ominous, huge auditorium did something that created, I think, a sense of awe for me that I can draw back to in my storytelling and in my filmmaking. But when I was a teenager, my family went through multiple divorces. My mom and dad divorced once, then they got remarried and divorced again. I sought like that higher power. I had to kind of figure out when I was in high school, like, what the heck is the world about? And I kind of fell into a Protestant youth group, kind of like in the 90s. It was one of those stereotype. We're doing, fluffy bunny games at youth group, stuffing the marshmallows in our cheeks and doing all those really kind of stupid things that kids love. But it met a need for me when I felt alone, and I started to want to know about God. And so there's definitely a negative part to my story where there was this message I got during that time as a teenager from a church that was basically, hey, if you want to be an actor or a filmmaker or a creative person, you shouldn't go to Hollywood because that won't honor God. You should use those creative gifts on Sunday or at youth group.
Right.
And so for a while, I was like, okay, I guess that's what I got to do. So I was doing, mimes and playing Jesus on Easter or Joseph in the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat.
Right.
And then I really kind of got wrapped up, and it did good things for me. But when I look back at it, I kind of feel a bit taken and kind of duped in a way, because I gave up some of those dreams early on. Like I could have gone to Los Angeles and I could have done all those things if I wasn't lied to, so I actually ended up going to theology school, and I'm really glad I did. I love my work, in studying theology and knowing all that I get to know through religions. I think just studying it, I realize I don't know a hell of a lot, and I still don't. Yeah. But I got my master's in theology, I have a bachelor's in biblical studies and youth ministry, and then I worked for a church for a good 20 years, and then it kind of got to a place where I was like, this isn't working for me anymore. And in 2018, I left full-time ministry and started BRAVEMAKER as a nonprofit film organization so that I could really do film and TV and acting without feeling hindered in any way. And then ironically, I went back to working for a church kind of part-time to make ends meet, as well as I found a church that was more inclusive and welcoming and felt a little more open-minded.
I was really grateful to be recognized as a partner with a denominational ministry. It felt like a win for me. It felt like I was being embraced in a family, in a home that I had so longed to, because my faith was so grounded and rooted in an organized community that wasn't being receptive to me from the past. So thank you to the American Baptist Home Missionary Society for saying yes to me and for not making the grant process super daunting and long like many of the other grants and applications that I've spent time pouring my soul over for so long. It felt like it was quick, it was simple, it was minimal, it asked all the right questions and did it in a very caring way.
There is, like you said, when you are very religious, there seems to be a fine, I don't know if it's a fine line or how I want to say it, but like to be in the arts and be religious don't always go together, even though some of the greatest art, like you look at Michelangelo and all that Renaissance period, came out of religion essentially. But I think too, like you said, they might not be so welcoming to you being an artist or going to Hollywood and making films that might have sin in them or whatever. Because I remember I used to work with this guy who was a born again minister, and he would just talk to me all the time, and I learned a lot from him. But he was against a lot of things. Like he wouldn't listen to music. He said music, the drum beats or the patterns of the drum beats and all the stuff for evil and those kind of stuff.
Oh my God. Demons could possess you through the drums and guitar, right?
So I think if you hold somebody back for too long, they're gonna rebel against it.
That's right. That's right. And now I wouldn't say I've rebelled, but I definitely poke at these religiosities and these kind of fundamental dogmatic ideas that people have put forth, and I've kind of found the humor in it. I think it's fun. I'm working on some satire show that I created. It's called Church Biz, and I really think that there's a lot of ridiculousness in religion that is just hilarious. I mean, how many times, like, one of the best laughs I ever have is like when you're not supposed to laugh, and usually it's like when someone farts during a church service, like that.
Right.
That is the best, So like if I could find those like ridiculous chuckles, in characters and in storylines, I think people would watch that on TV. So I'm playing around with that kind of stuff in my work.
Right, man. And as a guy who's very close to God, the church, and to knowledge of it all, would you say religion is fear-based and to control us? I mean, because you always hear all these different takes on it. I'm a Catholic guy, and but like you said, I wish I went to church more often, but I'm like, Easter, Christmas.
Yeah. The people in the church who work, they call those cheesters, Christmas and Easter. Cheesters.
I'm a cheester.
So let me make this really clear, Don, too. I don't even know sometimes what I believe, and I'm probably wrong on a lot of what I believe, and and I always say that when I speak, when I teach, I do use the Bible and talk about it, and I try to share what I think and what I've studied. But every single person who studies the Bible or preaches on a Sunday, and I think any type of religion, they're doing what in some respect, they think is right. And sometimes they think it's right to use fear to prevent people from having sex before marriage, or they use these words from the Bible that were written thousands of years ago out of context to condemn the LGBTQ plus community. Or I was a part of churches where it was, basically this unwritten rule, but verbalized, not written anywhere, that women couldn't hold leadership positions within the church because of what certain scriptures said that were meant, that were contextual to the time.
Right.
So I don't know. I think there is a lot of fear in religion, and that's what impacted me, right? That's how I think they were afraid. You'll go to Hollywood, you'll become a drug addict or a porn star,
right, exactly.
Crazy. So I'm trying to, in my faith expression, avoid that. And, I don't even know what I believe, to be totally transparent about the afterlife much anymore. I don't think that our versions of hell and heaven are really what they might be, right? So I'm not gonna. I don't talk about hell as a scare tactic anymore. It's not. It doesn't work for me in my faith, and I don't think it works for anybody else. So I could get in trouble probably for saying that kind of thing. But it really is like, I think the scriptures, is the way I interpret them from a whole, it seems to me that it's a message of love and inclusion and acceptance. And yes, there are consequences to bad behavior. Yes, there is an encouragement to do good in the world. And when people don't, that's why we have justice systems and law and things like that, which also have been abused. But there is, I think, a system or order in the universe, but I believe it's driven by love and justice and hope and truth. And I'm trying to lean into that as I do my work, not just with the church, but even in the film community.
Right on. Yeah. And that's why I think what you're doing, a lot of the films you make and the films you endorse through BRAVEMAKER are important, because I think you do tackle some deep emotional topics in your films. I mean, your film, that you just made, that came out, Last Chance Charlie, about your grandmother, and God bless you, man, on that, and God bless her. But it deals with suicide, and and it's comes from a very personal place, and I think it's important for other people who've gone through that too, to kind of see a movie like this, because it could be cathartic. And I imagine it was cathartic for you as you wrote it and directed it and everything you've done with that movie. Tell me a little bit about that process of kind of pouring your truth into a project.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah. So it's called Last Chance Charlene, and it is about a woman who loses her brother to suicide.
Charlene, I haven't seen you at church lately. You okay? It must have been so awful. I don't know what I'd do if a loved one committed suicide.
And it takes place in the creative industry because Charlene is an actor who's trying to break in as a screenwriter. And I wrote it from a personal place because that was my story. I was an actor trying to be a screenwriter, and it's so hard to get money for your film. And we all know the rejection. And then on top of that, I had lost my grandmother to suicide in 2012. And I lost her. And I'm very specific when I talk about this. I avoid certain words. So I don't believe that suicide is a mortal sin. I don't believe that someone dying, right? And that's the specificity, dying by suicide. It's not a crime. It's not a crime when someone decides to do that. I don't want people to do it, but I don't use the word commit, right? So when my grandmother died in October of 2012, I was working for a church, and I had to process that as a formal pastor in this large church community. And that's when I realized, wow, people have such a messed up view of this. And here I am as a, I'll call myself a survivor of this type of loss in a very tragic way. And people, they think they're trying to help you. They think they're doing, I'll say, quote unquote, what God wants them to do by saying things like, here's where fear comes into play, as you said. You need to tell people your grandmother's in hell because you want to prevent other people from taking their lives and going there too. I'm like, how dare people even say stuff like that?
That's
right, like so messed up.
What did that person say after you picked them up off the floor?
I I'll tell you what, I have had people just get so aggressive with some of the things I have said. I'm not an aggressive person, but I'm trying to push back and say, I don't believe my grandmother's in hell. My grandmother was mentally ill. My grandmother had a substance abuse problem as well in her later years. My grandmother was also in huge grief after losing my grandfather 6 months earlier to dementia. So my grandmother was in a very dark place. You know what? When she died in her bed by taking her own life, guess what was next to her? A Bible and a Time magazine with the very front cover article saying, "What happens when you die?" She was contemplating her life and spirituality to the last, who knows, breath.
Right.
So for someone to say they know where my grandmother is, like, come on, like that. And any person, any family member who has lost a loved one in this way, most likely has had a good intentioned person say something extremely harmful that just increases that wound and that loss. So I wrote Last Chance Charlene as sort of like a little rebuttal, or like you said, to be cathartic. I had to process my own life. I had to process my own understanding of the journey of how do you be a human being who's also trying to make it in the creative industry, who's also trying to keep their marriage together, who's also trying to mourn. It's not easy. And I hadn't seen something like this. People often say, make a film you want to see. So yeah, it's out right now. You can find it on Apple, iTunes, Amazon, all those places. And it was a hard couple years of making it, but it was also really beautiful. I often say nearly crushed me just because it's a lot of work to make a film. Anybody who makes a film, I don't care whatever length it is, it's hard. But a feature film takes a long time and a lot of money, and those things don't come easy. And you're dealing with a lot of where is it coming from? Who am I going to cast? Oh, this person says they're going to donate and they don't, and they disappear. It's like, oh my gosh, we lost our hard drive. I had a very amateur editor, because that's all I could afford, come on to help the project, and he deleted all of our files on accident, like 4 months into the editing post-production process.
Wow.
And that nearly took me off.
So did you recover it, or did you have to reshoot? Okay,
thankfully a friend of mine had like this wizard in Los Angeles who like recovers FBI type, hard drives that have been, and so we paid $1,500, and a month later we were back on track, but we lost time and money, blah blah blah. So anyway, you made a film. It's not easy, but it was awesome when it was complete, to see it on big screen, to talk about it. I worked with grief counselors who helped create a discussion guide and some resources for anybody in any form of grief to talk about what they're going through. Grief is not just death, but grief could be changing jobs or moving or seeing your kids go off to college, empty nesters. There's all sorts of grief. We were in a pandemic. We're still grieving that old way of life, all those things. So yeah, that was really cool to make the movie.
Yeah, I was going to say, to put it, to the whole process must have been also, you know, helped you get through it all? You know, just you know, putting it on paper, directing it, and all that stuff.
Haven't been in a good place.
Who is Charlene? It's been hell.
I don't believe in hell like I used to. Like, it's not a place we go when we die. It's life on Earth.
She's a fun one, isn't she, buddy?
And the actress who kind of is like your alter ego, I would think, right? I watched the trailer. I haven't seen the whole film yet, but she looks like she did an amazing performance on capturing those moments. What was it like directing her through, you know, your eyes, essentially? Like, hey, this is how I did it, or you know, like that kind of thing. Like, no, you got to feel this way, or that kind of stuff.
So her name is Allison Ewing, and she is a phenomenal actor. I met her working on some other projects. We did some short stuff in the past, and I originally wrote the film to call it Last Chance Charlie, and I was going to star in it. And then I was working with her on another project, and I realized, oh no, I don't need to star in this film. We don't need another white guy, you know, being a star of a movie. Let me change it up. Let me give this role to a woman and that will make it even more interesting. So she brought her own nuances to it. She also brought her own personal sense of loss after losing a cousin, and she had her own cathartic experience. But I'll just say, working with her, there were moments where it was very surreal, just the emotion, you know, that she as an actor putting herself in these imaginary circumstances was going through, that I would choke up behind the lens just watching through the monitor. And I still, when I watch it, I haven't watched it in a while because I would watch it at every film festival, you know, I would get moved by the story, by the music, by all of the collaborators who brought Last Chance Charlene to life. So yeah, Allison did her homework. You know, she multiple times we would Zoom before production started and just kind of walk through the script, and she'd ask questions, and she'd have just wonderings about how could we do this, or she even had some suggestions, right? Which I think is really cool. I always tell, after this experience, I tell actors, you know, you can advocate for yourself, because in some way this experience taught me I'm writing a character as three-dimensional as I can, but it's still got to come to life by a real life human being, a living, breathing human being who's going to step into that character and maybe know things that I didn't, and bring them to my attention and say things like I didn't have in the script originally, that Charlene had a commercial that was kind of running on public television, and it was kind of a small little thing, but Allison said Charlene needs to have at least something that she can go back to as a win. At the point in the movie when we meet her, it felt like she just had nothing. Everything was falling apart. And I thought, okay, that's good. We'll give her that one little thing, you know?
Right.
And she brought that. She advocated for that part of the character, which I thought was really cool.
That is cool. And yeah, and it's cool too when you know, when people could all contribute to the greater good, to bring the story feel like a whole. So that's really cool.
It's a beautiful story. It's a heavy story, and I just you know, just praying that it moves through me today, and so that, you know, the people that are going through this get a little lift from Tony's beautiful script.
Film making is whether it's however you, if you're the director, the writer, or however, it can be, like we said, very, very cathartic process, because I think there's a piece of us in every character you write, right? So you either way, you're kind of getting a little bit of you out there, and there's a freeingness to that, I think, too. But also, I think in a lot of, especially in indie films, you see a lot more depth of message in there, and how important is it to you? Because I've seen you've done films, you know, with human trafficking and abuse and a lot of issues like that, like real serious, hard issues to tackle, that I think through film too, you could connect with people on a different way that doesn't feel like preachy or this or that.
Yeah.
You know, so tell me about the importance of having a film with a message.
I appreciate you even kind of picking that up, you know, in my body of work. It for me, it's an interesting kind of conversation, because I don't sometimes set out to just do quote unquote message films. But I am drawn to certain themes, you know. So I have this film called 1440 and Counting, that happened to be about human trafficking. It was at the time when I made it in 2014, I was really becoming exposed to the reality of how in America people are trafficked. You know, boys, girls are trafficked for sex and labor, and adults are trafficked. You know, right in our own suburban neighborhood. So I wanted to write a film about that. I just did a film this past week about a couple struggling with infertility. You know, so we're dealing with the challenges of pregnancy and kind of in a similar way how people can not really be helpful with little comments that they make. And that was because a friend of mine shared a story. And then I all of a sudden got like really passionate about that. You know, I've done a story about, you know, the housing crisis. And so I just kind of have to go with what my gut instinct is kind of drawing me to. I like to do things that are interesting and I got to get excited about it. I also just did a film called The Crossing Guard, which is like a real silly comedy about a dad who volunteers to be a crossing guard at his kids' school. But oh, good morning. Job, I love this job. The power. I'm gonna hold it just a little extra longer. All right, have a good day. I was also kind of laughing, like even though it seems dumb and silly, there is a message there about parenting. There's a message about volunteering and how unappreciated sometimes people who are public servants are. So I guess that's just my bent. I think entertainment in every form is great, whether it's reality shows or serious dramas or prestige TV or indie films or studio Marvel movies. I can find something good in all of it. And I hope my career, I can have a variety of projects and not just be doing one thing, you know, pigeonholed into one thing. So while I can, I'm just experimenting and exploring whatever suits my taste.
I believe in these kids. I believe they're our future. You know, we'll teach them well and let them lead the way.
Yeah, your body of work does kind of go into different directions, like you said. You know, I saw The Crossing Guard, which was great with the, you know, the Whitney Houston dialogue in there. Hey, children are the future. Teach them well and let them lead the way. And
you caught that, yeah.
All the love, all the beauty that we possess inside of us. Because
also you get Killer Couch. And
yeah,
you know, like so you got a lot of fun stuff too. So you know you have range. I would, you know, for lack of a better way to put it. But what do you think about films that are straight up popcorn, like Fast and Furious or you know, Maverick or those types of movies?
Bring it. I think there's a place for them in pop culture and in even Fast and Furious. Isn't it about family? It's about family.
Salute me, familia. Salute.
So I think all of that stuff, you can still probably make a case that there's messages in that. And I know there are filmmakers who would really rail against that. Like, I'm not a message, but there's structure, and every filmmaker knows, every screenwriter is writing toward a concept or something, even if it's just like the movies, the scary movies that are like the mock you know, like the scary movie franchise, which mocks horror films. Even those have a POV, point of view. So you know, not that every one of those films is going to be something I want to watch or pay for, you know, 15, 20 bucks at the theater. But I think that's what's so cool about our world and about diversity, is that there's a place, or should be at least a place, for everybody and every kind of story and every kind of storyteller.
Right on. There's always got to be an arc to every story, even though I still haven't found the arc yet to Jason and Friday the 13th. Like
revenge.
I see all your movies, man. And you know what I've really noticed? You're angry.
He's just the same guy from the first one all the way to the last one. But what would you say is your favorite genre of film? Like what gets you going to the theater?
Gosh, I'm gonna see Renfield tomorrow. So I just love, I don't know, I just love interesting stories. I don't necessarily feel like I'm drawn to a particular thing, but I really do like dramedy. I like some sense of laughing and crying in a story. And I think some of the things I'm drawn to in my own work are, could I make someone cry and could I make someone laugh even in the same 2 hours? Because that feels like my life. There are times when I just, like today, you know, I was so overwhelmed, and there were so many things not going right in my day, which seems like that's a theme of my life. Like just being a filmmaker, I run a nonprofit. It's so hard, and I'm so tired, and I just would like a real day off. And at the same time that I want to give up, and I feel like I'm crying, I'm laughing at some ridiculous thing that I saw on Instagram, and I'm watching it on repeat, and I'm like, oh, I just needed that. I needed to let go and just laugh at this stupid thing that was like a 13-second clip, but I watched it 4 times, you know? So that's the kind of stuff I like, dramedies where you got both, you get a little bit of both.
Yeah, I'm the same way. And even as when I write a screenplay or something like that, I'm always writing in that way. Like I want to be able to, to make you the feel emotions.
Yeah.
You have to love the characters. So if you love the characters, they'll bring you to tears, and they'll make you laugh, and you're rooting and you're on their side.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times that's the biggest challenge is to how do I make this flawed, because I like to write flawed characters.
Yep.
So how do I make this flawed character likable, and how do I make the audience root for this person?
Yep.
That you know. And
I think there's something filmmaker Jim Cummings said that comes to my mind a lot. Jim Cummings did Thunder Road, The Beta Test, and another film I'm blanking on about a werewolf. Oh, Wolf of Snow Hollow. He said, if you don't put something funny in your dramas, your audience will find something funny about it anyway. So make it intentional. Right. I thought that was cool. Even the biggest dramas need to have a little bit of humor. Even the funniest comedies need to have a little bit of drama.
Right on. I agree totally. Yeah, because it just gives it that extra depth, or it just gives it something to it. Because like if you're watching a serious movie, like I don't know, that movie with the I forget the title of it, where he's like, "You drink your milkshake and I'll drink mine." Like, it's like,
yeah, there will be blood.
Yeah, there will be blood.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, it's like you know, it gets old quick. At least for me, I know.
Sure,
I think that movie went on to get some awards and things. But for me, I'm like, I can only watch this movie once.
Yeah.
You know, but I think there needs to be some kind of like you said, peaks and valleys for your emotions. But what would you say is the best movie of all time?
Oh gosh, I can't even not answer that. I have I could say like the best movie I watched last week, you know. All time I cannot. Oh my god.
It is hard because there's so many you know, genres, and then there's so many subgenres, and then there's so many like decades. So that you have to really break it down, because like a movie that was great in the 70s or the 50s or something might not hold up to today now, because like you ever watch like an old movie that you loved, and like the Cannonball Run or something, and you're like, oh, I can't even watch this now.
Yeah. So my very first movie I remember watching in a theater was E.T. And I think I saw it like 6 times, 8 times in a theater. I feel that's how I remember it. Could be wrong. But I can watch that today and still feel some of the same emotions I felt when I was like 8. Yeah. And I don't know, that's my favorite movie, but there's those movies that just are iconic for the nostalgia, and it can hold up as well, you know. So I think always changes my movie connections.
True. And there is something, the connection you have when you see a movie at a certain time period in your life too, that could make a difference. Like for you, it was E.T. You saw it when you were young, and that resonates with you. For me, it was Star Wars. That was the first movie I ever saw in the theater, and I was like 6, 7 years old when it came out. And man, and even when I watch it now, the first one, as flawed as it might be or whatever, or I still and it's got like, it's still perfect to me. Like, but I hear from other, you know, they'll be like, oh well, you know, doesn't make sense how this happened. You know, they start doing all that stuff. But but no, that's cool. Yeah, now I'm trying to get my film, Comic Sans, that we spoke to you about the last time on your show. We're trying to get that in the festival circuit. We finally got into a couple festivals, but we're finally at a festival where we could actually attend.
Oh, great. In New York or where?
It's in North Carolina.
Oh,
so
cool.
I lived in North Carolina for a long time too. I was in the film scene over there. They got a good film scene, Raleigh, North Carolina. If you ever get a chance to check out some of their stuff. But yeah, so
okay.
But do you think like diversity, right? in films, and I didn't think of this until after I cast and filmed the movie, but our film is heavily white males. Do you think that holds us back from getting in festivals? Or, should we have been more diverse?
Yeah, I'll be transparent. I think that is something you need to consider when you do your movies is diversity is right now an important topic. It's an important topic for the industry in general, right? Because we're seeing the lack of diversity, the lack of people of color in major roles, and that's not good. That it just communicates, I think, from a casting perspective, a lack of representation, and we want to put on screen what the reality of our worlds are. Now, that said, I understand if, hey, the story you're telling is about a bunch of white comics, and maybe that's the story you needed to tell. And that's what you have to be honest about, is like, this is what we know and what we're trying to do. Maybe next time you go, how can we do it differently? And I think diversity isn't always just in front of the camera too, it's behind the camera. So when I do my films, I'm trying to be intentional to say, how can I be learning from people of different cultures and sexual orientations and genders behind the camera as well? Because I'm also reading articles in Variety and Hollywood Reporter, and there is some statistics to say that diversity is a good choice because audiences are diverse, and they will go out, they will pay money. So if you want to make money, be diverse.
Right.
It actually, not only is it a good thing to be a good human, it's also smart business. So yeah, I think as you do your film festival, you'll have to look for that feedback and wonder. I'll be, transparent too with the BRAVEMAKER Film Festival. That is one thing that we do look for when we watch our films. We have a 10-point rating system, and one of the categories is it their diversity in front of the camera? And we're looking for the directors. Is there diversity in the crew? Is it not just homogenous, one race or one gender, et cetera? Because that is, but it's a part of the overall evaluation. It's not everything, but it is an important part.
Yeah, we were definitely diverse behind the camera. Our whole cast and crew was all Nick's diversity, but on camera, and it was not by design, but as I'm get rejected or whatever from other festivals, I start to say to myself, is it? I wonder. It has to be, because I think the film is good, but everybody is white, and there's no. So that's something that, down the road with the future films that I start working on, they will be definitely more diverse. I do think, not just so I can get in film festivals, but I do think too, because to show that kind of inclusion and different points of view and things like that. And the comedy world is very diverse.
I agree.
So it would be very interesting and very cool to mix that up. And I'm working on the next one. So I already have that in my
That's great. Yeah. And it starts with the writing, right? So it starts with the creation of the story. Now you can be intentional about that. And I think I'm aware of that in my television shows too. I love Succession, but I watch Succession. I'm like, why? This is like a bunch of white people. And it's a bunch of rich, affluent white people making bad choices. And I love the show, but I'm like, okay, you can only handle that for so long. And so I think we as filmmakers and creators have that power to make those inclusive decisions, because it makes it better for us too as makers. We're going to be learning from people along the way, and audiences will respond to it positively too, I think.
Awesome, man. Well said, dude. And I appreciate you shine that light and being transparent with me on that.
Sure. Yeah.
Tony, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me. Just tell everybody where they could find you, follow you, and all the BRAVEMAKER information, all that good stuff.
You got it. If you just Google Tony Gapastione, I'll pop up. I'm on all the socials under my name, and then our organization is BRAVEMAKER. All of the socials on every handle, it's BRAVEMAKER.org. And if you have a film, check out BRAVEMAKER Film Fest on Film Freeway, or come out to our July Film Festival in Redwood City, California, and hang out.
Awesome. Very cool. I'm going to submit my movie anyway. No,
do it. Submit it. We need some white guys. We need some. Come on.
All right. Well, you're the best, man. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Don.
Tony Gapastione, everybody.
All right. Ciao.